The executive branch of the federal government of the United States of America has at its top the President of the United States, elected to office and serving legitimately, lawfully under the Constitution. However, just because the president is the most powerful person in the executive branch in terms of the organizational structure does not mean that the president is even the boss of his own day. A president, like a king, like any public person, has a very busy daily schedule, and they usually don't set it themselves. Our current president, Donald Trump, is more willing than most presidents who preceded him to get involved in the details of how he spends his day. A president can certainly request time with a person or people that he wants to see whenever they get here. He can adjust his schedule. A president can even arrange for that rarest of things for a president, free time. But most every minute between waking up in the morning and going to sleep at night, the president's time is scheduled. And the people who schedule it are the White House Chief of Staff and the White House Chief of Staff's office. The Chief of Staff is like the head butler in a mansion. The Chief of Staff's job is to serve the President of the United States as an employee, to decide what the President's schedule will be, what the President will and won't do. Now, for somebody like President Trump, who's very hands-on about these things, the White House Chief of Staff is not a particularly strong position. And they've actually had trouble keeping people because President Trump basically wants to be his own chief of staff to the extent anyone can be. But most presidents before him had more to do or wanted to focus on other things than their daily schedule. So the chief of staff would take on a great deal of power and influence because, like an old master of the chamber in the Byzantine Empire, the chief of staff decided who got to see the president, how much time they had, at what point during the day, was it during a good mood phase or a bad mood phase, where that meeting would happen. All of those little details would be determined by the chief of staff. If the chief of staff happened to be friendly towards your position, you get in at a good mood time of day when the president is feeling on sort of his best. If you aren't personally liked by the chief of staff, or if the chief of staff disagrees or just doesn't see you as worthwhile, worthy of the president's time, he might not schedule you at all. No time with the president. Sorry, he's too busy. Or he might schedule you for a 2-minute meeting between two annoying things where the president is going to be tired or grumpy or whatever. So, the chief of staff in most presidential administrations is an employee of the president. He works for the president. Doesn't have to deal with Congress or anything like that. His job is to schedule the time of the President of the United States, make the appointments, do all the details, and make sure that everything the president that says will happen does get taken care of and tended to. The chief of staff supervises the secretarial staff that works for the president, that takes notes and does all of the various things necessary to record the president's actions and decisions. Another person that's important, kind of important, since they're the only other person in the United States that's elected by the people of the entire nation, is the Vice President of the United States. Now remember, the first vice presidents were the people who ran against the president and lost. So, for example, in 1796's election, John Adams of the Federalist Party, who was George Washington's vice president, is now running for president. But against him is Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic Republican Party. Jefferson loses, Adams wins, and now Adams has Jefferson as his vice president. How would it have been if Hillary Clinton had become Donald Trump's president? Oh, that would have been fun for everyone. No. So in 1800, this has changed, and Jefferson, who wins the 1800 election, does not have Adams as his vice president, who loses. Jefferson has someone else. I don't recall. But it's somebody who works for Jefferson, who's part of the Democratic Republican Party, and who believes in the Democratic Republican Party's values, which are pro-farmer, pro-small businessman, that sort of thing. Particularly pro-farmer, pro-Jefferson, and pro-France. So this vice president, at first it was assumed that if anything happened to the president, the vice president would take over. But in fact, the full codification of that into law and practice takes quite a while. Still, the vice president is there so that in an election, if you have a northeastern liberal, you can counterbalance that by having a more conservative or centrist guy from the south. Like in the 1960 election, you got John F. Kennedy, who's from the northeastern United States, from Massachusetts, and he picks as his vice president Lyndon Johnson, a moderate to conservative Democrat from Texas. And the idea is that Texas balances Massachusetts, the moderate balances the liberal. But vice presidents are there in case something happens to the president, which is kind of a depressing job, really. I mean, you're one heartbeat away from the presidency, but still, for you to become president, somebody's got to die. It's not a happy situation. It is actually a job that is often resented by the person who's actually vice president. Next time, the cabinet.